My father was Navy, American military, and the Navy, the way it runs is they move 1, 2, or 3 years every time, and they bring their children and their wives with them. Just before World War II, I was born in New Orleans, but it was right at the end of his stay there, so I was only there a few months, and then we moved, well, everywhere. I was in California, Oregon, Washington State, Indiana, Japan, and Italy. I was in Morocco for a week. We were stationed in Morocco. We were supposed to go there and stay. And after a week, a sandstorm came in, and I had to climb out a window and open the door from the outside because the sand had piled against the door. And then my dad made some noise, and we got moved to Naples, Italy. So that was very fortunate. I'm not sure I could have liked Morocco. They have strict limits on the amount the garbage they can collect. You bring with them to the next place. So I had hobbies, electronics, a whole bunch of stuff, and every time we'd move, I'd have to leave them all behind, throw them out. And then I'd go to the next place, and very often I'd pick a new hobby. So I became, eclectic. Lots of different things, like, cars. I did robots in a place, electrical engineering, chemistry. And these are all in different places at different times as I moved. And so I learned a lot. Just by moving and collecting hobbies, telephones, lots of things like that. When I was in 7th grade, I think it's 7, yes, Bobby Fischer was just starting to be very famous. And so I joined the chess club because, me and Bobby Fischer are the same age. And, but I learned that I didn't like to lose. I guess nobody likes to lose, but I didn't like to win either. It was, some of the kids jump up and down and scream and shout, I beat you, and so I don't know. I didn't like to win or lose, so I'm just non-competitive, and so I stopped chess then. My dad was in California when I hit college age, which is lucky because California had a free college if you're a resident. And my dad was a resident because they had a special dispensation for military people. So I got to essentially go to college for almost free. And you could pick any college you want. And if you have your choice, you pick Berkeley, right? The university was kind of open. You enrolled, and if it was a crowded class or a mandatory class of some sort, then you were enrolled in the class. But the other classes, they held a lecture, and you could go or not go. And so you could always walk in on a lecture that you weren't entitled to, that you weren't enrolled in. And I did a lot of that. And that's the term professional student, where you just wander in a school and kind of hang on in a school is something else. My curriculum was electrical engineering, but I didn't take it that seriously. I had been an electrical hobbyist and a ham radio operator, and for years and years, and so I just walked through it. It was easy curriculum, and I spent all my other time just doing other things in the university. So that's essentially it matched my attitude then, where I just didn't care. I loved the school. I loved the classes. I was always learning something, I wasn't trying to graduate. I wasn't trying to get a job. I was in a work-study program where you go to school for 6 months, and Berkeley was in a semester system. So I'd go to school for 1 semester and 1 summer session, and then I'd go to work, for another 6 months. So back and forth, and that gave me enough money to just hang around Berkeley and do what I wanted to do. And the job I had was electronic in a missile factory in San Diego. And so I in some sense, I built missiles in San Diego for money to go to school. It was fun. Everything I did was fun. I think that is essentially my life, is that I did different things would come up and I'd take what I liked, but I never had a goal. I never tried to make money. I never tried to get a degree. I never tried, I didn't care. The university had a big computer, bigger than this room. And they ran it from 8 a.m. in the morning to midnight. And that was enough to get the university work done. But in those days, you don't turn off big computers. You leave them on, because turning them on and off, they'd break more often than if you left them on. And I was into the fabric of the whole computer. Computers were coming as a computer science. There was nothing before that. But computer science was coming as a discipline. I had access to nearly every computer on the campus, certainly all the ones I knew. And the main computer, I had keys, and I could go in at midnight when it was idle and do like a personal laptop, except it was weighed 10,000 pounds. And I had a professor. I was very good friends. I think mainly because I wasn't a normal student. I was. If I liked what the professor was doing, I'd join in and we'd be friends. I had a professor who was a very good friend, who is a famous games player, who was visiting for a year, maybe 2 years at Berkeley as a visiting professor. And when I had the big computer, that was the fastest one. And I'd have some program, on some game that he knew or we knew or something. I'd invite him over after midnight, and he'd come over, nearly in his pajamas at 2 a.m. and play my computer. So I was into computer games a lot then. He, the professor, was just fabulous at all games, personally, as well. And he wrote about them and did research on them. And I could never beat him, ever. It was just impossible. I don't know why. And he applied to graduate school for me and gave my class schedule. Otherwise, I probably would still be a student walking around Berkeley now. Well, right at graduation time at Berkeley, I guess every major university, they have interview week for getting a job, for going out to get appointments to companies. And the companies would all come out and put a little booth up in the gym, and you'd go from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And the visiting professor, the one that was my friend, came from Bell Laboratories. And he told the recruiter to get me, to see me. And the recruiter would send me schedules to show up and talk to him. But I didn't ask for the schedules. I didn't know anything about it. Suddenly he just call me and say, And so I put him off, and that there, around the university, typically for a week. They're all there. And I'd missed every appointment that he gave me. And it was on a Friday night when he was leaving on a Saturday. And it was late, probably 10 at night. And he knocked on my door. He came to my house, knocked on my door, and we drank beer and talked. And then after that, Bell Labs, called me and said they wanted an interview. They wanted me to go out to Bell Labs and talk to several people, and I did that. Reluctantly, I did that, but they finally they talked me into it. So I went out to Bell Labs, and I was so impressed with the place. It was like Berkeley, where I didn't personally care about the classes because I was interested in classes where you learn things, but it was never academic. It was never a chore or a task. It was always fun. And Bell Labs appeared to be that exact thing, but they get paid. So, and when I went there, I recognized lots of famous people. Bell Labs has a ton of famous people by their names on the doors as I walked down the hall. And it didn't take much more convincing than that. And so I interviewed with a couple of people, one of which I knew from literature, not from personal. And then in a day or two after that, I said yes, and then I went there, and I was there for 35 years. Bell Labs at the time I went was in a 3-entity agreement between Bell Labs, MIT, and General Electric to build an operating system. And MIT had a previous operating system that was very good, seriously good, and was successful in the literature, and everybody at school used it, at their school used it. And they have a thing that is pejoratively called second system syndrome, where they did this one, they're going to do the next one better, And so they went all out. They actually talked General Electric into building the machine for that operating system. So it wasn't just any machine you could just put the operating system on. It had its own machine, which was the size of this room again. And Bell Labs and MIT designed the operating system, and it had about 4 just brand new concepts that they had no experience with, and some of them fought each other. They weren't orthogonal. It went on, and Bell Labs wanted it because it was advertised as a computing utility. Like you turn on the lights, you just go and use the computer, and it was supposed to handle large classes of people. It was supposed to be really efficient, and in fact, it was horribly inefficient. Where it was supposed to handle all of Bell Labs, which is probably 10,000 people, it handled 6. And it was delayed and very expensive because these machines were very expensive. They were brand new machines and were only sold to a few people who were working on Multics. And so eventually Bell Labs said, that's enough, we quit. And they backed out. Then I was free, like at Berkeley, I could do what I wanted. And I was doing a lot of, because the new machine wasn't really being used, it was being built. I was using it for games and various things. But so then when we backed out of it, I didn't even have a job doing it, right? I wasn't working on the operating system because we were, so it took maybe 6 months for the machine to go out the door to be shipped out back to the manufacturer. And so I had 6 months essentially alone with this one big machine all the time, and had a good time. It was fun. It was just like Berkeley. There was one machine that had a nice scope, a nice screen, and I put the first problem I really tried was scheduling a disk, and then at some point I had to test the algorithm. I had to put load on the disk to see how it operated, how it worked. Testing it, see, measure it. And to do that, I needed testing programs. And to have testing programs, I had to store them somewhere on the disk. And to store them on the disk, I had to put a file system on the disk. And to put a file system on the disk, I had to access the file system and pull the test program out and execute it to run the tests. And that is 80-90% of an operating system. And I didn't realize it. I was just doing one piece at a time. And at some point I realized, and before that I had no idea that I was building an operating system. I had no idea. And at some point I realized that I could do this much better if I could had an editor so I could write the programs, and a compiler so I could compile the programs, turn them into machine language, and an operating system to run multiple programs at the same time so I could simulate 10 users going after the disk. And the famous story is, and it's true, that I dedicated 1 week to each of those 3 tasks to make it a complete operating system. Just when my wife was going to California from New Jersey to take my son to my parents, to her in-laws, for a 3-week, my son was new, and my grandparent, his grandparents wanted to see him, so she disappeared for 3 weeks, and I finished off Unix in that amount of time. And then we had 2 users because there was only 2 stations on this little computer. There are no telephone lines, no connections. You could get better work done faster on that machine, which was probably somewhere between 1/10 and 1/50th of the power of the big machine. Because it was interactive, it was time sharing. You could sit there and get something done rather than key punch a deck of cards and then submit it over a counter to be run later, and then your results will come back and be put in your outbox, and then you look and see how it did, maybe anywhere from an hour to 6 hours later. You could just do it. It reduced turnaround time from hours to seconds. And so all my friends, probably 5 of them that worked together with me on Unix, on Multics, started using the machine. Dennis Ritchie was one. I did Unix all alone, and Dennis was one of the first users because it was just better than the Comp Center. Eventually, we rewrote Unix for different machines. And at one point, we divided the work. I did the operating system, and he did actually the disk driver. And then we wrote the paper and put our names on it. And Dennis was the co-author after that. In some sense, I stole the language B. There was, at MIT, we were still using the operating system at MIT. And there was a visiting professor from England, came out to MIT and brought his language, and his language was BCPL. And I like it's not the syntax, it's not the way it looked, but it was what it did underneath. It was the model underneath the language that I liked. And I used that model. I put a real brief syntax, but a good one, on top of this model of the computer, and that was B. And then Dennis took that syntax and added types, bytes, integers, floating point, into the language. And the purpose of that was to write the next version of Unix in a higher level language. And the language was the language that Dennis was developing at the time we were writing it. And I was doing the writing of the operating system, the next edition of Unix. And Dennis was maintaining the language, which at that point he called NB, new B. And the language was growing considerably, and we'd get together, and I failed at Unix 3 times because of the language. It was hard to do something, and it got complicated, and I couldn't keep all these things in my head. And then at some point I declared failure, and we'd talk about the language, what we could do to the language to make it easier to write Unix on a new machine. And finally, C got to be almost what C is today. And at that time, I wrote Unix on a new machine. And that was the takeoff of Unix. But the fact that it was in a higher level language means that you could port it to another machine very easily. You didn't have to rewrite everything, because the machines are very different inside. And the language, you can make the language adapt to the machine rather than having the human adapt to the machine and have to rewrite everything. All during this time, these 35 years, Bell Labs was picking up Nobel Prizes in various things, and it had nothing to do with Unix or computers sometimes. Astronomy, they had one in astronomy, they had one in low temperature physics. The thing that made it special, now I don't think that this can be reproduced today. I don't think there can be a Bell Labs today. And the reason is kind of double, that it would have to come out of either completely supported by the government, which, just at those levels, it just can't be done, where you would more than double everybody's salary every year, and have 10,000 people in 20 different disciplines, physics, chemistry, materials, math, computers, everything. You just couldn't do that with government funding. And you couldn't do that with Amazon kind of funding, from a company, because the company would have to, they got a product and they want to make money, right? They can have some sort of research, but it will always be around their product. That Amazon will never have a chemistry department, ever. I mean, it's just throwing money away. But Bell Labs' product was patents. It was patents and support of the telephone company. I always had more ideas than I could implement, always. And I think that probably most of the people at Bell Labs were in that situation. And sometimes you would sit there and say, that's too hard. I don't, that's going to take 5 years, and I don't want to waste 5 years of my life. Or sometimes it's little. And sometimes you'd get the right people together to do it, where they could, their disciplines meshed very nicely. And at Bell Labs, there were all these different people. I mean, they weren't hired. They were hired for their attitude and their, their single-mindedness, right? And it didn't much matter what their degree was, whether it was math or this, We had social scientists, we had astronomers, we had artists. We had, and they were just all the same. They were just thrown into a big pot. When I'm programming, I have a task, right? And it consumes me. When I wake up, that's what I do. And when it's consumptive. It's what I do. And there's no time to read. Occasionally when something new comes out, either somebody would tell me or something and I'd go read things. But if I read some things, typically it was for what I was actually working on at the time. So I was the word is pinhead. Basically, you're not broad even in computer science. I wasn't broad. I was very deep in one piece of it, and pieces of it just I didn't know about. It's just the way when the work is more important than the learning. And to counteract that, I know that was wrong, that I shouldn't do that, that on 2 separate occasions, and again because the way Bell Labs worked, I quit Bell Labs for a year and went off to a school to teach. From the other way around, from a school going to Bell Labs, it's called a sabbatical. So this is kind of like an inverse sabbatical. So when I went out there, I taught essentially the whole curriculum. I taught like 3 classes a quarter and probably 10 or 15 classes for the year that I went, because it's all new to me too, and you have to really learn it so that the kids you're teaching it to don't nail you to the wall. They just love to do that. If you make a mistake and tell them something that's not true, you'll get hammered. So so I was just barely ahead of the students in my classes when I went out there, because I'd never had computer science. And then I did that twice. I went once to Berkeley, taught for a year at Berkeley, and then I went once to Sydney University in Australia. And the purpose was to teach and to learn what I was teaching in order to be worthwhile to the students. Early, I think it was around 1972 or 3. I wrote a chess program just because I knew the rules and I thought it would be easy. And I was naive, really naive. I probably still don't understand the dynamic range of chess. There can be a beginner who plays good chess, right? He'll beat his dad, but then there'll be somebody who can beat him. And the word in math is sigma, 1 sigma. That means he'd beat him 2/3 of the time. He'd get 2/3 of the points between this. But then there's somebody who'll beat him 1 sigma, and somebody will beat him. And when you're working down here, some people are better and some people are worse, but you don't understand the hierarchy of sigma. There must be, 6 or 8 sigma above you. You have no idea how strong that is or how deep the game is, and you come to realize the strength around you. So I was going to conquer the world with my computer. Super naive, beyond naive. So I wrote a chess program just for the hell of it, and then I found out that every year the ACM tournament, the big national tournament every year, had a sideline, or mainly it's almost an exhibition rather than that they'd put on a computer chess tournament of the top. They only had room for so many teams, right? And so they'd decide how many teams, and at first it was like 6, and as it got bigger and more popular, it became like 12, and they'd actually try to convince the 12 best teams in the United States to compete. And so I was sitting there with a brand new chess program, and so they let me in, and I went to the ACM tournament, and I got my head handed to me. I mean, it was brutal. It was really brutal, and so I went away and forgot about it for a while, and then but I kept reading the literature about what was going on, and then 8 years later, I designed and made a machine, and the machine was just a move generator. It would generate the legal moves, and it plugged in as a board into a real computer, into we had that because we owned the machines and we owned the language and we owned the operating system. We owned all the devices on the. It was easy to do that. You plug it in and then you write a little driver to talk to it, and then you use that in your program. And so anyway, I sped up my program by using this, and I went off and just played it around. And then there was a guy who was really good at hardware in our area. Again, it's Bell Labs. You'll find somebody who's really good at anything you need. And he and I then built a bigger chess machine from the problems I found with the little one, where it was slow, where it was fast, where it was good, where it was bad. And it competed equally and maybe a little better, probably a little better than the monster computers that were running chess in this tournament. CDC had like the fastest computer in the world, and there was like 3 of them in this tournament, right? It was registered as an official player with the chess league, with the American Chess Association, and so it had a rating, right? And when I played one of the bells, baby bell versus middle bell versus higher bell, it would kind of get a rating, and then I try to improve and find out what was wrong and raise the rating as much as I could. But then I would build a machine that was 10 times faster, and the rating had jumped, a couple of sigma. And then I'd take it for a year until I got another idea for another machine. So in 1978, I took this middle machine that this hardware expert and me put together, and we won it, And so then I was hooked. I had to do it. And in 1980, I built what was the biggest machine we ever ended up building. That was about 1 meter square, but about 2.5 meters tall, like a little refrigerator. And we took it off to Linz, Austria, and where they had the World Computer Chess Championship, and I won that. So I was the world chess champion from a weaker tournament, you understand? And then that lasted probably 6 or 7 years until the craze started coming out. The craze machines where the algorithms for chess were built into the hardware, and I couldn't change it. But I could make it faster or do some algorithmic changes in microcode, but I really couldn't actually. When somebody found a better way of doing some part of chess, I couldn't just put it in my machine. And the craze, which were programmable machines, they could adapt much, much faster than I could. So I started getting beat around 85, 86. I left Bell Labs in 2000 and was hired at Google, and they pretty much let me do whatever I want. And I roamed around and got into 2 or 3 projects. 3 of us who were in adjacent offices went to a C++, which is another computer language, proposal for an edition, for a new version. and it was so complex. I couldn't understand it. I mean, supposedly I'm supposed to know languages, but it was so, I don't know. Oh, Pinhead. It was ridiculous. And it was monstrous. It was like 50 pages of dozens of these things. And we came back together and said, this is wrong. And we designed a language roughly that very day. And then we spent a year implementing it and getting it working. And then Google started put it in open, where it was available to everybody all the time, and they took input from the public. And it's become, it's actually good for many things. I use it almost exclusively now for everything I do. What it's really good for and what has really adopted it is the cloud. Somebody who provides a service to hundreds, millions of people. They found it to be the best thing for them. If you have some app that you connect to as an API, and thousands of them, or an editor or a calendar or patents. I mean, whatever you do, any of your APIs, you go through to a company who now is almost exclusively written in Go, and that's where it's most popular, and has become. There's a list of I don't even know how to pronounce it. It's TIOBE, something like that. List of the most popular computer languages, and maybe it's won the language of the year twice on TOB, and it is very popular and picked up and adopted really quickly, even though most people don't use it for all the things that I think it's good for.